The Knoxville diner on Route 11 West had 32 stools a counter that had been wiped down 10,000 times until the laminate showed through in pale oval patches, and one waitress on the 11 o'clock shift who had learned to carry 4 plates on one arm and a coffee pot in the other hand without spilling either. June Calloway had worked the late shift at the Route 11 diner for 4 years. She was 32 years old. She had dark brown hair she kept in a ponytail because loose hair and pie plates were a combination that did not end well for anyone. She had green eyes that her mother had called sea glass eyes, the kind that caught light and held it a beat longer than you expected. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow from a car accident she did not like to talk about, and a laugh that came out sudden and real when something was genuinely funny, which was not often at 11 in the evening in a diner on Route 11 West. She had a daughter named Wren. Wren was 6 years old and slept most nights in the back office on a cot that June had set up next to the filing cabinet because the sitter June had trusted for 2 years had moved to Chattanooga in September, and June had not yet found a replacement she could afford. The manager, a man named Gordon Bales, who was 61 and smelled like pipe tobacco and kept a photograph of a beagle on his desk, had told June once that having a child in the back office was technically a liability issue. He had not said it again. He left a blanket on the cot every night before he went home. June was wiping down the counter at 11:47 on a Tuesday in November when the bell above the door rang. She did not look up immediately. She had learned long ago that looking up at every bell was a way to exhaust yourself on a long shift. She finished wiping the arc of laminate she was working on, set the rag down in its particular way, and then looked up. 3 men. Not local men, not trucker men, not the kind of men who wanted pie and decor and a quiet place to sit while the highway miles fell off their shoulders. The first one was tall, built, heavy across the chest with close-cropped hair and a jaw that looked like it had been set by someone who meant for it to stay that way. He wore a dark jacket and dark jeans, and he walked to the counter the way men walk when they are accustomed to rooms moving around them rather than them moving around rooms. The second man was shorter, leaner, with a shaved head and a silver ring in his left ear, and hands that he kept very still at his sides, which was the kind of stillness that did not come from peace. The third man stayed near the door. He did not sit down. He did not look at the menu board. He looked at the room. June said, "What can I get you?" The tall one sat down on a stool. He did not pick up a menu. He looked at June for a long moment, the way a man looks at something he has been trying to find for a while and is now confirming the finding. He said her name. He said June Calloway as a statement. Not a question. She kept her face still. She had gotten good at keeping her face still. "I think you might have the wrong person," she said. He reached into his jacket and then set a photograph on the counter face down and slid it across to her with 2 fingers. She looked at it. It was Wren. It was Wren walking out of the elementary school on Maple Street at 3:15 in the afternoon wearing her yellow backpack with the owl patch on it. The photograph had been taken from across the street. Wren was holding her lunchbox and looking down at something in her hand, and she had not noticed the man with the camera. June looked at the photograph for 3 seconds. She did not touch it. She looked back up at the tall man. He said, "We just want to talk." She said, "I get off at 2. He said, "We will be back at 2. Then he stood up and walked out, and the lean man walked out, and the man by the door walked out, and the bell above the door rang again, and they were gone. June stood behind the counter. Gordon was gone. There were 2 other customers, a trucker in a booth by the window, and an older woman who came in every Tuesday and ordered the same thing and left $1.50 on the table, which was more than she could afford, and June knew it. Gordon had left at 11. The cook, a man named Pete, who was 24 and had headphones around his neck at all times, was in the back doing prep for the morning. June walked to the back office. Wren was asleep on the cot with her owl backpack on the floor next to her, one arm thrown over her head. She had 3 stuffed animals arranged at the foot of the cot in a specific order that changed each night and which Wren considered to be a matter of some importance. Her hair was a shade darker than June's, and she had her father's nose, which was the only thing June had ever liked about her father. June stood in the doorway for a moment. She watched her daughter breathe. She had been watching her daughter breathe since the night Wren was born. This specific sound, this specific rise and fall, and she had learned over 6 years of single motherhood and bad gas money and late shifts and back office cots that as long as she could hear that sound, she could handle everything else. Then she went back to work. She served the trucker his check at midnight and smiled at the older woman when she left at 12:30 and did her job and did not let her hands shake because shaking hands dropped plates and she could not afford to drop plates. She counted the minutes to 2 o'clock in a way she had not counted minutes since she was 9 years old, and her mother was late picking her up from school. At 1:15, she went back to the office. She picked up Wren without waking her. She put Wren's shoes on her feet while she slept. She put the 3 stuffed animals in the owl backpack and shouldered it and picked up her daughter again and went to the back door and got her own bag off the hook. Her bag was an old one, canvas, dark green. The strap replaced twice the bottom worn soft. It had been her mother's. She carried it everywhere. It was the only thing she had left of her mother, and she did not know what was at the bottom of it because the lining had long since come loose, and she had never bothered to fix it. She had thought about it occasionally, but something had always stopped her, some reluctance she could not name, as if opening the bottom of her mother's bag would be like opening something that was meant to stay closed. So she had left it. 6 years of carrying it everywhere, and she had left the bottom alone. She went out the back door into the cold. November in Knoxville had its own particular disposition. Not the hard, clean cold of the mountains farther east, but something low and damp and settling, the kind that came off the river and got into your jacket before you had gone half a block. June had worked the late shift through 3 Novembers, and she had never stopped noticing it, the way the air changed at 1 in the morning, the way the parking lot looked under the sodium lights, the way her sneakers made a different sound on the asphalt when the temperature dropped below 40. She noticed it now as she pushed through the back door with Wren heavy and warm against her shoulder. She noticed the cold and the light and the particular silence of the lot, which was the silence she had expected. No cars she did not recognize. No one leaning against the wall with a cigarette. Nothing wrong on the surface. But she had learned 6 years ago that nothing wrong on the surface was not the same as nothing wrong. Her car was a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked rear bumper and a heater that worked on the driver's side only. She put Wren in the back seat and buckled her in, and Wren made a small sound and curled against the door and did not wake up. June got in and started the engine and sat for a moment watching the back door of the diner in the rearview mirror. Nobody came out. She pulled out of the lot. She drove. She did not know where she was going. She knew only 2 things. She knew that those 3 men had photographed her daughter leaving school, and they had done it that afternoon, the same day they came into the diner, which meant they already knew where Wren went to school, which meant they had been watching for some time. And she knew that her apartment was the first place they would go when she did not appear at 2. She drove west on Route 11. The heater blew warm on her left side and the window fogged, and she wiped it with her sleeve. The road was empty this time of night. Knoxville at 2 in the morning had its own particular silence, a working city sleeping lightly between shifts. She thought about calling the police. She had called the police once before in her life, and what had happened after that had taught her things about the police that she had not known before and that she could not unknow. 6 years ago, she had been 26 years old waitressing at a different diner, one closer to downtown, and she had gotten off work early because the power had gone out in the kitchen and they had closed at 9. She had cut through the alley off Market Street the way she always did, and she had seen 3 men, and she had seen what they did, and she had seen the face of the man in charge, and she had pressed herself against the brick wall in the dark, and she had not breathed. And the men had not seen her, and after a very long time they had left, and she had walked the rest of the way home. She remembered that walk. 32 blocks. She had counted them. She had counted them because counting was something to do with her mind, besides think about what she had just seen, and because counting kept her feet moving at a normal pace, not too fast, not too slow. The pace of a woman walking home from a shift, nothing unusual, nothing to notice. She had not run. Running was the one thing you did not do. Her mother had told her that once a long time ago in a context she could not remember, but the instruction had stayed. Running changed what you were. She had gotten home. She had locked the door. She had sat on the floor with her back against the couch because the couch felt too tall and she was not ready to be that far off the ground. She had sat there for a long time. Wren had been asleep in the bedroom, 3 months old, making the small sounds she made when she was deep in sleep, the ones that June had learned to hear through closed doors, the ones that meant everything was all right. June had listened to those sounds and she had made decisions. She had waited 2 days. She had gone to the police station on Central Avenue and asked for the detective on the case. Victor Slade had been 44 gray at the temples with the kind of handshake that meant something to him. He had sat across from her at a table in a room with no windows and taken notes. He had asked good questions. He had been thorough. He had the particular manner of a man who was very good at seeming to care. And then he had looked up from his notepad and said, "Are you sure about what you saw?" And she had said, "Yes, absolutely sure." And he had looked at her for a moment with an expression she had not been able to read at the time and said he would be in touch. He had never been in touch. The case had been closed. Insufficient evidence. She had read it in the local paper, 2 paragraphs on the 3rd page. 3 months later, her mother had been killed, shot twice in what the paper called a random robbery on the street outside her apartment. Nothing taken. The case had been assigned to Victor Slade. It had been closed within 10 days. No suspects, no arrests. June had never told anyone what she thought she knew about that. She drove. The gas light came on at 1:47 in the morning. She had 12 miles of highway left in her, and she knew it. She thought about the 2 things in her checking account and the 3 things she owed this month and the math that had been the permanent background noise of her life for years. She took the next exit because the next exit was there. The road off the highway was 2 lanes and dark. She drove for a mile without seeing anything that looked like a gas station. She drove another half-mile and the road curved, and on the far side of the curve, set back from the road behind a gravel lot, was a building. Low brick, the front door steel with a small symbol above it that she could not make out in the dark. Along the front, a row of motorcycles, 7 of them parked in a line, with the particular precision of people who cared about how things were placed. A single light above the door yellow. In the lot, 2 pickup trucks and a dark van. June sat in her car for a moment. She looked in the rearview mirror. Wren was still asleep. The stuffed animals had settled around her in the way they did when the car stopped. The gas light blinked. She put the car in park and turned off the engine and sat in the silence. She had passed this building on the highway before she thought. She had seen the motorcycles from a distance. She had not paid close attention to what kind of building it was, but she had some idea. Everybody in Knoxville had some idea about Iron Ridge riders. She looked at her bag. She did not know why she did it. She looked at her bag the way you look at something that has been sitting next to you for years, so familiar you have stopped seeing it. And something made her reach inside and open the small interior pocket she had opened 100 times for her keys and her phone, and she put her hand in and felt along the bottom edge of the lining. There was a folded piece of paper she had never felt before. She pulled it out. It was a slip of paper, small, maybe 3 inches by 2. Her mother's handwriting very clear, written with the kind of care her mother used for things she meant to last. An address she did not recognize. Below the address, one name. Cal Decker. She sat with the paper in her hand. She knew the name. She had heard it not often in the way you hear a name without filing it away carefully. A man her mother had mentioned once years ago in a way that suggested something and then had not mentioned again. She had been 22 or 23. Her mother had said the name with a particular expression, not warm, not cold, something more careful than either. She looked at the building. She looked at Wren in the rearview mirror. She got out of the car. She did not go to the front door. She had never been the kind of person who went to the front door of a place like that. Instead, she walked around the side of the building where the gravel gave way to dirt, and there were 2 plastic chairs leaning against the wall and a rusted can that had been used as an ashtray for a very long time. She stood with her back against the brick and the cold coming off the November ground through her sneakers, and she listened. Inside voices, low the particular register of men at the end of an evening post-conversation rather than mid. She heard the sound of a bottle set down on a table. She heard what might have been a laugh cut short. She heard the refrigerator hum. She was still standing there when the back door opened. The man who came out was not large in the obvious way. He was maybe 5'10" broad through the shoulders with gray at his temples and a face that had been weathered by more than weather. He was wearing a black vest over a long-sleeve shirt, and he had boots that had been resoled at least once. He came out the door slowly the way men come out of rooms when they have been sitting for a long time and want air, and he looked at the lot, and he looked at the sky, and then he looked at her. He did not startle. He looked at her the way a man looks at something unexpected when he has learned over many years not to react to unexpected things until he understands them. He said, "You lost." She said, "My car is out of gas. My daughter is asleep in the back seat." He looked toward the lot. He looked back at her. She held out the slip of paper. He took it. He held it under the light that came from the door and he read it. He read it carefully. He read it a second time. Then he looked up at her, and in the yellow light from the door, she could see that something had changed in his face. Something had moved through it and settled somewhere below the surface, the way a wave moves underwater without breaking. "What is your name?" he said. "June Calloway," she said. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them. He said, "Your car is in the lot." She said, "Yes." He said, "Come inside." She did not move. She said, "I have my daughter. She is 6." He said, "It is warm inside. She can sleep on the couch." She looked at him. He looked back at her. She went to get Ren. Inside the clubhouse was what she had expected, and also not what she had expected. The main room was large enough to hold a long table and a kitchen area, and a sitting space with 2 couches that had seen better decades. The walls were brick painted white a very long time ago. There were photographs on the walls and patches, and a shelf of charity ride trophies from 8 or 10 years of events, the kind that collected dust without anyone feeling right about moving them. Along the back wall, apart from everything else, a section she noticed immediately because it was different from the rest. 7 photographs in plain wooden frames, all different ages, all different faces, all of them looking out at her with the particular stillness of people in old photographs who did not know they would end up on a wall. There were 4 men at the table when she came in. They looked up when Cal came in behind her with Ren over her shoulder still asleep. Nobody said a word. The man on the left, heavy set with a gray beard and forearms like dock rope, stood up and walked to the kitchen without being asked. He came back with a glass of water and a blanket. He set the water in front of a chair and spread the blanket on the longer of the 2 couches, and June put Ren down on it and tucked the blanket around her and straightened up. The man with the gray beard said, "I am Booker." He said it the way men say things that are meant to be simple facts and nothing else. The man next to him, thin 60 or so with glasses that were too small for his face, said Dix. He gave a short nod. The young one, 20-something, with the look of someone who had not yet grown into his own size, said Tuck. He was looking at Ren with an expression that might have been wonder. The only woman at the table was somewhere in her late 40s. Dark hair cut short with the kind of face that had been through a significant amount and had come out the other side knowing what it knew. She said Nell. Just that. June sat down. Cal sat down across from her. He set the slip of paper on the table between them. "My mother wrote that," she said. He nodded slowly. He knew. She looked at him. "When did you know her?" He looked at the paper for a long moment. 6 years ago, he said. "She came here once." June waited. He said she came and she asked for help, and I told her we could not provide it. He paused. 2 weeks later, I heard she had been killed. The room was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. June said she was shot twice on a street corner. They called it a robbery. Nothing was taken. "Yes," he said. "She said I reported to the police before she died. 6 years ago, I saw something I should not have seen, and I went to a detective named Victor Slade, and I told him what I saw. Nothing happened. The case was closed. Then my mother died." He looked at her. She said, "I do not know if those 2 things are connected." He said, "Do you think they are?" She said, "Yes. I have always thought they were." He sat back. She said, "Tonight, 3 men came into the diner where I work. They showed me a photograph of my daughter walking out of school. They said they wanted to talk. They said they would be back at 2. Cal looked at Booker. He looked at Nell. Something passed between them that did not need words. He said, "What did you see 6 years ago?" She told him. She told him all of it. The alley off Market Street, and the 3 men, and the face she had seen, and what she had seen done. She told it plainly and without embellishment, because it was not a story that needed embellishment. When she was done, she looked at her hands on the table. Doyle Rankin Cal said quietly. She looked up. He said the name again. "Is that who you saw?" She said, "I did not know his name at the time. I know it now. I put pieces together over the years. I never said it out loud to anyone. The name Doyle Rankin had a particular weight in this room. She could feel it the way you feel a barometric change before weather, a slight pressure shift that changes the quality of the air. Booker said something quietly to Dix that she did not catch. Nell said nothing, but she was watching June with the attention of someone who was doing several calculations at once. Cal looked at the wall with the photographs. He looked at it for a long time. June said the slip of paper in my mother's bag. I found it tonight for the first time. I have carried that bag for 6 years. I never felt it before it was behind the lining. How did it get there, he said. I do not know, she thought about it. She gave me the bag a few weeks before she died. She told me to keep it and not lose it. She said she had been carrying it too long and her shoulder was hurting. She said I should carry it for a while. He was quiet. She said she knew something was going to happen to her. Yes, he said. I think she did. June looked at the photographs on the back wall. She said, why did you say no when she asked for help? He looked at her steadily. Because I was afraid. Not for myself, for the men in this room. Copperhead Kings are not a small problem. They have people in the city, they have money, they have history. I told myself it was a practical calculation, and it was not. It was fear, and I called it something else. She nodded. He said, I have been wrong about it every day since. She looked at him for a long time. She said, that is a straight answer. He said, you deserve a straight answer. She looked at Wren asleep on the couch under the blanket. Wren had not moved. She still had one arm thrown out the way she had slept since she was a baby, in a crib that took up half of a studio apartment. June said, I do not know what I am asking you for. I just needed somewhere to go that was not my apartment and not a place they already knew about. She paused. I did not know what this place was until I pulled over. I just had the paper. He said, I know. She said, I cannot ask you to get involved in something because of a debt you think you owe my mother. He said, you are not asking. I am deciding. She looked at him. He said, there is a difference and I know it. Your mother came and asked, and I made a decision, and the decision was wrong. Tonight you came without asking because you had nowhere else to go, and because your mother 6 years ago apparently thought enough of me to write my name down and give it to you, even though I had let her down. He stopped. Either she was wrong about me or she was right about me, and I would like to try for the second one. June was quiet. Nell said from the end of the table, June, how long have you been carrying that bag? 6 years, June said. Nell said, do you know what is in it? In the lining. No. Nell looked at Cal. Cal looked at the vest on the chair beside June. He said, may I look at it? She handed it over. Nell came around the table. She ran her fingers along the bottom seam of the bag slowly, methodically, the way a woman runs her fingers along something when she knows what she is looking for and is taking her time finding it. She pressed gently along the outer edge. She stopped. She looked at Cal. She said, there is something else in here. He said, do not open it tonight. He said it clearly and calmly, and with the weight of a man who had learned that some things should be looked at in the light of day, with clear eyes and full information, and no one running on no sleep and bad coffee. He looked at June. He said, you and your daughter are going to stay here tonight. We have a room in the back. It is not fancy. There is a cot and a space heater and a lock on the door. Tomorrow morning we will sit down together and look at what is in that bag, and we will figure out what comes next. June said, you do not know me. He said, you came here with a slip of paper in your dead mother's bag and 3 men threatening your daughter. I know enough. Tuck, who had been quiet the whole time, said, I can get gas for her car tonight. I have a can in the shed. Cal said, do that. Dick said, I will check the lot. He stood up and put his glasses in his shirt pocket and went toward the front door. Booker poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot that had been sitting too long and brought them to the table and set one in front of June without asking. June put her hands around the cup. She was shaking slightly. She had not known she was shaking until the warmth of the cup met her hands and her hands pressed back against it. She had been holding herself together so carefully for the last hour that the warmth was the first thing she had allowed herself to feel, and it came in through her hands. She looked at Wren. She looked at the photographs on the wall. She looked at Cal Decker, 57 years old, gray, at the temple, sitting across from her with a cup of bad coffee and the particular stillness of a man who had made a decision and was not going to unmake it. She said, my mother used to hum when she was cooking. There was a song. I still hum it sometimes without meaning to. He looked at her. She said, did you know her well? He said, not well. I knew her the way you know people in a neighborhood. She grew up on Sycamore Street. I grew up 2 streets over. We were not close, but she was not a stranger. June nodded slowly. She was kind, she said. Yes, he said. She was very kind. He was quiet for a moment. He said, I am going to tell you one thing, and then I want you to eat something and sleep if you can. He looked at her steadily. I did not help your mother when she asked. I cannot change that. But I am going to help you, and I am going to help your daughter, and I am not going to let fear make my decisions again. That is not a speech. That is just what is going to happen. She looked at him for a long time. She said, my mother wrote your name down. He nodded. She said, I am going to trust her. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Nell, can you get her something to eat? He stood up and walked toward the memorial scroll. He stood in front of it with his back to the room. He stood there without moving. Nell had already gone to the kitchen. June looked at the bag on the table beside her. She looked at the slip of paper her mother had written 6 years ago and placed in a hidden pocket of a bag and carried until her shoulder ached and then given to her daughter and told her to hold on to it. She thought about her mother. She had thought about her mother every day for 6 years. She had thought about the phone call she had gotten from a patrolman at 6 in the morning and the drive to the hospital and the hallway and the man with the clipboard. She had thought about the apartment she had packed up alone over a weekend in January, carrying boxes down 3 flights of stairs, while Ren slept in a bouncy seat on the floor. She had thought about the things she had kept and the things she had given away, and the things she had simply stood holding for a long time before putting them in one pile or the other. She had kept the bag. She had not thought about the blank as anything other than the bag. She had not thought about what might be inside it beneath the lining in the space that had always felt a little more solid than canvas should. She had not asked herself why a woman who noticed everything had given her daughter a bag without explanation and told her to carry it. She understood now. Nell came back from the kitchen with a plate, a piece of toast and 2 eggs and a piece of sausage, simple warm. She set it down in front of June. She sat down next to her. She said, I was an ER nurse for 22 years. June looked at her. She said, I have seen a lot of people come through this room. Most of them come in the way you came in, running, usually from something they have been running from for a long time. She paused. The ones who make it are not the ones who are the least afraid. They are the ones who walk into the right room. June said, how do you know this is the right room? Nell said, I have been in the wrong rooms. I know the difference. June picked up her fork. She ate. Ren did not wake up. She slept the deep sleep of a child who had spent the evening on a cot next to a filing cabinet, who was accustomed to falling asleep in back offices and waking up in new places. She slept with her arm thrown out and her stuffed animals at the foot of the blanket and her owl backpack on the floor below her. Across the room on the memorial wall in the photograph third from the left, a woman with dark hair and a serious expression looked out from a plain wooden frame. June had not looked closely at the photographs yet. She was focused on her food. She was very hungry, and she was not going to let herself show it, but she was. She did not know what she was looking at on that wall. She did not yet know that she would recognize the face before morning. Cal stood in front of the wall for a long time. The men moved around him in the way they had learned to move when he stood that way, quietly giving him the space of his own silence without making anything of it. He stood in front of the photograph that had been there for 6 years. Iris Calloway. The woman who had come to his clubhouse on a Tuesday evening in October and sat at his table and asked quietly with the kind of dignity that made saying no harder than he had wanted it to be, for the Iron Ridge Riders to give her daughter somewhere safe to be for a few weeks while some things settled down. She had said it was complicated. She had said she had seen something and told someone, and now she was not sure the someone she had told was going to be safe to know. She had said she was not asking for much, just a little time, just a little distance. And he had looked at his men, and his men had looked at him, and he had felt the weight of what she was asking and the size of what it might cost. And he had said, Mrs. Calloway, I am sorry I cannot bring that kind of trouble to this chapter. She had thanked him. She had thanked him for his time, which was the detail that had stayed with him for 6 years, that she had thanked him for his time after he had told her no, because she was that kind of person. She had walked out the door. 14 days later, she was dead on a street corner. He had read it in the paper, and he had cut out the article, and he had put it in the back of the small notebook he kept in the inside pocket of his vest. He had written her name in the notebook on the page that already had other names. Older names, the names of people he had failed to help in the years before her. And now her daughter was asleep on his couch. And her daughter had come carrying something that the bag had been protecting all these years without either of them knowing it. He turned around. June was eating. She was eating with the focused attention of someone who was very hungry and was not going to let herself show it. She had her eyes on her plate, and she was keeping her shoulders down and her breathing even, and she was doing it with the practiced control of a woman who had been holding herself together under difficult circumstances for a very long time. She looked like her mother. Not in every feature, but in the particular quality of her attention, in the way she held her stillness, in the way she asked direct questions and listened to the answers without deflecting. Cal sat back down at the table. He said, "June." She looked up. He said, "Tomorrow morning when Ren is awake and you have had some sleep, I want to look at what is in that bag together. With all of us." He nodded at Booker and Dix and Tuck and Nell. "Is that all right with you?" She said yes. He said, "And I want to talk about Victor Slade." Her face changed, just slightly, a tightening at the corners of her eyes, the smallest sign that the name had a particular landing place inside her. He said, "I know about Slade, not everything, but enough to have questions I have never been able to answer." He paused. "Some of what you told me tonight connects to things I have been sitting with for years." She said, "What kind of things?" He said, "There are 4 other people from this county who reported to Slade about things connected to Rankin. Over 10 years. None of them are alive." She was very still. He said, "You are the only one still walking, and I am going to make sure you keep walking." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I should not feel safe here." He said, "Why not?" She said, "You are strangers. You are strangers on motorcycles in a clubhouse in the middle of the night. I do not have any reason to feel safe." He said, "Do you?" She thought about it. She said, "Yes," which surprises me. He said, "It surprises me too that you are here, in the good way." He picked up his coffee cup. He turned it in his hands. He said, "Your mother was smart. She put that paper in a place where you would only find it if things got bad enough. She knew you would find it. She knew where it would lead." June looked at the bag. She said she knew you would say yes this time. He said, "I hope she was right about that." She said, "I think she was." Booker had come back to the table with a second pot of coffee, better this time, and he poured without asking. Tuck had come back in from the lot and reported that the car was gassed up and the lot was clear, and there was nothing on the street that looked wrong. Dix had come back from his circuit of the building and sat down without a word. Nell had walked to the back room and come back and reported that the room was ready, heat was on lock, worked fine. June looked at the room full of people she did not know. She said, "Thank you." Booker said, "Do not thank us yet." He said it as something close to a joke, and Tuck smiled at his end of the table, and June felt something happen in her chest, small and careful, the kind of feeling she had learned not to have too quickly. She picked up Ren. Ren made the small sounds she made when moved without waking, a soft complaint that resolved back into sleep. June carried her to the back room. The room was what Cal had said. Small a cot, a space heater already running a lock on the door. There was a folded blanket at the foot of the cot that smelled like laundry detergent, clean and plain. There was a lamp on a small table and a glass of water. She put Ren down. She arranged the 3 stuffed animals in their order. She tucked the blanket. She sat on the edge of the cot. She held her mother's bag in her hands. She turned it over. She pressed along the bottom edge the way Nell had done, slowly feeling for the shape of whatever was there. Something rigid, something flat, the size of a thumb drive, and beneath it something softer, layered, folded small. Paper, she thought, more than one sheet. She did not open it. She sat for a long time with the bag in her hands. She listened to Ren breathe. She thought about her mother. She thought about Iris Calloway, who had grown up 2 streets over from a man named Cal Decker, who had gone to his building and asked for help and been turned away and died 2 weeks later, and had still in the last weeks of her life written his name on a piece of paper and hidden it in the bag she was giving to her daughter and told her daughter to carry it. She had still believed he would be the right person. Or she had decided to trust him with the right person, which was the same thing and also not the same thing at all. June lay down on the cot next to her daughter. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the space heater and the low voices from the main room and her daughter's breathing and the distant sound of a truck on the highway. Then she slept. In the main room of the Iron Ridge Riders Clubhouse on the edge of Knoxville, Tennessee, 5 people sat around a long table and made decisions quietly the way people make decisions when the stakes are real and the night is long and there is no room for anything other than what is necessary. On the wall behind them, 7 photographs looked out from plain wooden frames. One of them was a woman with dark eyes and a serious mouth and a quality of attention that her daughter had inherited without knowing it. Morning in the clubhouse came without ceremony. The light through the front windows was the gray flat light of a November dawn, the kind that gave you shapes before it gave you colors. Booker had made coffee that was better than the night before, which was not a high bar, but was still appreciated. Tuck had run out to a gas station 2 miles away and come back with a box of donuts and a carton of orange juice, which he set on the table without saying anything, and which Dix immediately moved to the center where everyone could reach. Wren woke up at 6:43. June heard her before she was fully awake herself, the particular rustling of a 6-year-old checking on her stuffed animals before anything else. June lay still for a moment, listening, confirming the room, confirming the door was locked, confirming Wren. She said, "Good morning, Bird." Wren said, "Why does it smell like motorcycles?" June said, "Because we are in a place where motorcycles live." Wren thought about this. She said, "Do they sleep inside?" June said, "Not exactly." She sat up. She looked at the bag on the floor where she had set it the night before. It looked the same as it always had, canvas dark green worn at the corners, the thing she carried everywhere, the thing her mother had given her. She said, "Wren, I need you to be very good this morning. We are going to go sit with some people in the next room, and they are going to help us figure something out. While they are figuring it out, I need you to sit quietly. Can you do that?" Wren said, "What are they figuring out?" June said, "How to make something safe." Wren considered this with the gravity she brought to most questions. She said, "Okay." They came out into the main room. Cal was already at the table. He had slept, she thought, though not much. He was wearing the same clothes, but he had his hands around a coffee cup, and the cup was fresh. He looked up when they came in and gave Wren a nod that was serious and respectful, the kind of nod you give to a person, not to a child. Wren stared at him. She said, "Are you the boss?" He said, "More or less." She said, "My mom said we are here because it is safe." He said, "That is right." She said, "Okay." She climbed up on a chair and put her stuffed animals on the table in their specific order and pulled the carton of orange juice toward her. Tuck said cups are in the cabinet and went and got one without being asked. Nell sat down next to Wren. She had the quality of a woman who had been around children in difficult situations and knew how to be useful without being alarming. She talked to Wren about the stuffed animals. She asked their names. She listened to the names with the appropriate seriousness. June sat across from Cal. She put the bag on the table between them. He said, "Are you ready?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Nell." Nell came and opened the bag. She worked slowly, carefully, running her fingers along the inner seam the way she had the night before, but this time she was not feeling for presents. She was opening. The lining had been sewn with a second layer so close to the original that you would not have felt it unless you were looking for it. Someone with small, careful hands had done it, and had done it well enough to last 6 years of daily use. Nell found the edge of the seam and worked at it gently with the small scissors Dix had produced from somewhere. The stitching gave. She reached inside. The USB was first, small, older model, the kind that had been standard 15 years ago and was now something you found in drawers between batteries and takeout menus. She set it on the table carefully. Then the letters. 2 of them folded into small squares, sealed. The handwriting on the outside of each one was the same handwriting as the slip of paper June had found the night before. The same hand, Iris Calloway's hand. One letter had no marking on the outside. The other said, "To June when she is old enough." June put her hand flat on the table. She looked at the letters. She looked at the USB. She said she knew. Cal said she had time to prepare. Whatever she saw or knew, she had time to make this. June said she had 3 weeks. Between when she came here and when she died, she had 3 weeks. He nodded. She said she put it in my bag after you said no. He did not look away. She said she decided that even after you said no, you were still the person she trusted with whatever was inside this bag. She looked at him. "Do you understand that?" He said, "I am trying to." She said she was not angry at you. She was practical. She hid the evidence in the thing she was going to give her daughter, and she put your name on the paper, and she gave it to me, and she told me not to lose it. She was covering all the possibilities. He was quiet. She said she was an extraordinary woman. He said yes, she was. Booker said quietly, Cal, the USB. Cal looked at Dix. Dix had a laptop already open on the table. He was 61 years old and wore glasses and had spent 20 years as a mechanic, but he had also spent 4 years doing technical work for the chapter that nobody talked about in specific terms. He set the laptop in the center of the table where everyone could see. June pushed the USB across to Dix. He plugged it in. They waited. A single folder appeared on the screen. Inside the folder, one video file and one text document. Dix opened the text document first. It was a sworn statement. Handwritten, then photographed, then converted to a file someone had saved carefully. 6 pages, dated October 15th, 6 years ago, which was 5 days after Iris had come to the clubhouse, which meant she had written it after Cal said no. She had come here, been turned away, gone home, and written down everything she knew, and sealed it and hidden it. The room was so quiet that June could hear the tick of the wall clock above the kitchen and the distant sound of traffic on the highway a mile away. Nobody moved while Dix read. He read slowly, and he read it twice, and then he turned the laptop so that the screen faced June. She read it herself. The statement was precise. Her mother had never been a woman who used 3 words when one would do, and the statement had that quality that economy every sentence placed where it needed to be and not where it did not. She named Doyle Rankin, and she named Victor Slade, and she described the meeting she had witnessed between them in the same plain, careful way she had described things her whole life, which was the way of a woman who had spent decades being the kind of person other people relied on and who knew that reliability was built out of saying exactly what was true and nothing more. The statement named Doyle Rankin. It named a man called Victor Slade. It described a meeting Iris had witnessed between the two of them, a meeting she had seen by accident through the window of a bar on Market Street in which Slade had told Rankin the name of a witness who had come forward about an incident in an alley. The witness's name in the statement was June Calloway. My daughter, the statement said. He told Rankin my daughter's name. I heard it clearly. Below that, in the same careful hand, I do not know what will happen to me. I have gone to the Iron Ridge Riders, and they have said they cannot help. I understand why. I do not blame them. I am writing this down because if something does happen, the record should exist. June will find this. She carries the bag everywhere. She is stubborn in the right ways. She will find it when she needs to, and she will know what to do with it. June read that paragraph 3 times. She had to stop after the 3rd time. She put her hands flat on the table and she looked at the wood grain of the tabletop and she breathed. She said she knew I would find it. Cal said yes. She said she knew I would find it, and she still trusted you with the address. After you said no, she still wrote your name down. He said yes. She said, do you understand what that means? He said, I am trying to. The room was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The video was next. Dix hovered over it for a moment. He looked at Cal. Cal looked at June. She said, play it. The video had been shot on a phone at an angle that suggested a pocket or a bag. The setting was dark, a bar or a back room, hard to tell exactly. The audio was what it was, compressed and distant, but clear enough when you leaned in. 2 men in a room, the side of a face just visible at the edge of the frame. The man whose face was visible was Doyle Rankin. June knew this because she had seen his face in an alley 6 years ago and had spent the years since learning his name and his face and the particular way he held himself, and because she would have recognized that face in the dark. The other voice was not on camera, but it was a voice June had heard once in a room with no windows at a table across from a man with a clipboard and a careful handshake. Victor Slade. In the video, Slade said a name that was not June's name, not her mother's name, a name June did not recognize. He said it quietly, and Rankin said something in response that was not fully captured, and then Slade said, it is handled. That was all. 2 minutes, 40 seconds. Then the recording ended. Booker said, that is enough. He said it the way men say things are enough when they mean the case is made and the next step is moving, and they have been in enough rooms to know the difference. Cal said, I need to make a phone call. He stood up. June said, who? He said someone I should have called a long time ago. Her name is Sarah Drummond. She is a federal agent. She has been working on Rankin for 3 years. He looked at June. I have been watching from a distance for 2 years, keeping track of what Copperhead Kings were doing in this county, because I knew eventually something was going to come to a head. He paused. I did not know it would be you. She said, did you know about Slade? He said, I suspected. I did not have evidence. He looked at the USB on the table. He said, now we do. He went to the back office to make the call. The men at the table did not speak loudly. They spoke in the low, practical tones of people who had done difficult things before and knew how to prepare without dramatics. Nell refilled Ren's orange juice. Ren was drawing on the back of a paper placemat that Tuck had found somewhere. She drew with the concentration she gave to everything, a face taking shape on the paper with careful crayon lines. She had found a box of crayons in a drawer and had sorted through them without asking and chosen the one she wanted. June watched her daughter draw. She thought about her mother sitting at a table somewhere with a pen and 6 pages of paper, writing down everything she knew, naming names, describing what she had seen, doing the careful, invisible work of a woman who knew she was running out of time and was spending every minute of it on the people she loved. She thought about the bag. 6 years on her shoulder, 6 years on the bus and at the diner and on the walk to Ren's school and in the back office next to the cot. 6 years of carrying something she did not know she was carrying. She thought about her mother telling her the shoulder hurt. I have been carrying this too long, Iris had said. You carry it for a while. She had known. She had known, and she had given it to June because June was the safest place she could think of, and because she had written Cal Decker's name on a piece of paper and hidden it in the pocket, and she had believed, despite everything, that the right moment would come. Ren looked up from her drawing. She said, Mom. June said, yes, Bird. She said, the lady on the wall. June looked up. The memorial wall. She had not looked closely the night before. She looked now. The third photograph from the left. A woman in her early 50s, dark hair threaded with gray, the kind of face that held steady in photographs. A serious mouth, and eyes that June recognized the way you recognize a voice on the phone that you have not heard in a long time, immediately, and in the bones before your mind has caught up with what your body already knows. She stood up. She walked to the wall. She stood in front of the photograph. Ren came and stood next to her. June said very quietly, that is your grandmother. Ren looked up at the photograph. She had seen photographs of her grandmother before. She had seen the one June kept in the bedroom and the one June had in her wallet. But those were from when Iris was younger, and this was different, newer, taken in the last year or two of her life. The face June had not seen as often because she had not been there. She said, why is Grandma on the wall? June said, because the man in charge of this place remembered her. She looked at the photograph for a long time. She looked at her mother's face. Iris Calloway, who had written 6 pages of evidence and hidden it in a bag and given it to her daughter and told her not to lose it, who had trusted a man who had failed her once, who had laid the pieces of a plan across 6 years and an entire county, who had been smart and patient and practical in the face of something that should have broken her and did not. June put her hand flat on the wall next to the frame. She did not cry. She had been not crying for 6 years by knowing the exact moment when the pressure came and breathing through it and going back to work. She breathed through it now. Ren took her hand. They stood in front of the photograph together. Cal came back into the room. He saw them at the wall. He stopped. He said, Drummond is coming. She will be here in 2 hours. She has a team. She wants the USB and she wants to talk to you. June said, did you tell her what is on it? He said, I told her enough. She was very interested. He paused. She said she has been waiting for something like this for 18 months. He walked up next to June and stood looking at the photograph. He said, I put her picture there the week after she died. He said it quietly. I could not help her. I could at least remember her. June said she did not blame you. He looked at her. She said if she had, she would not have put your name in that bag. He was silent. She said she thought you were a good man who made a bad decision. Those are different things. He looked at the photograph. He said, I have been trying to decide which one for 6 years. She said, I think you are getting closer to the right answer. At 9:43 in the morning, Booker came in from his circuit of the building. He said, Cal. Everyone in the room went still. He said, there is a black SUV 1 block east, and it has been there since 7, and it has not moved. Cal said 1. He said 1, confirmed. Tuck is checking the back. Tuck came in from the back hall 30 seconds later. He said gray pickup on the south lot. Did not see it at first because it pulled in between 2 of ours. The room shifted, not into panic, into something quieter and more purposeful. The shift of people who have done this before. Cal said, how long until Drummond? 90 minutes. He said, we hold. He looked at June. She said, they found us. He said, they have been watching us since last night. They know the car was gassed up. They know we have guests. He paused. They do not know what is in that bag. She said, what do we do? He said, you and Ren go to the back room. You lock the door. You stay there until I come for you or until Drummond arrives, whoever comes first. He looked at her. I need Ren out of the main room if this gets complicated. She said, I am not afraid of them. He said, I know. That is not the point. She looked at her daughter. Ren was watching the door with an expression that was too old for her face. She had picked up the 3 stuffed animals and was holding them against her chest. June picked her up. She did not say anything else. She carried Ren to the back room and put her on the cot and sat next to her. Ren said, are the bad men outside? June said, some people are. The good people inside are going to handle it. Ren said, how do you know they are the good people? June thought about it. She said, your grandmother decided they were. And she was very smart. Ren said, Grandma was very smart. June said, yes, she was. Ren put the stuffed animals in their order at the foot of the cot. She lay back against the pillow. She said, tell me about the owl. June said, which owl? Ren said, the one on my backpack. It was a request June had fulfilled before this specific request at this specific hour of tension, and she understood what it was. It was the request for the familiar, for the story that made the present moment smaller and the known world larger. She told the story about the owl on the backpack. She had told it many times, and she improved it slightly, each time adding details expanding the character. The owl's name was always Ren, and the owl was always very clever and always found her way home, no matter how far away she had gone, or how dark the sky had gotten, or how many wrong turns she had made. Outside in the main room, the quiet preparation continued. Dix had moved the laptop and the USB to the back office safe. Booker had made a second circuit and come back with a count of vehicles. Tuck was at the front window with his phone in a very casual posture. Nell was at the kitchen counter doing nothing in particular with her hands, which June had come to understand was what Nell looked like when she was paying attention to everything. Cal sat at the head of the table. He sat the way he always sat when things were serious. Very still, very present. The stillness of a man who had already made every decision he was going to make and was now simply waiting to act on them. The radio on the shelf was off. Nobody had touched it. At 10:14 it came on. The same voice June had heard described once by a witness who had not lived to tell anyone else. Flat, precise, the kind of voice that was accustomed to saying things once and not repeating them. Mr. Decker, we know you have a woman and a child. We are not interested in your chapter. We are not interested in any difficulty. We want the woman and we want the bag. You have 1 hour. The radio clicked off. The room did not move. Nell said very quietly, Cal. He said, I heard it. He picked up his phone. He called Drummond. She picked up on the first ring. He said, we are out of time. She said, 14 minutes. Keep them on the outside. He said, how many do you have? She said, enough. Hold the line. He set the phone down. He looked at his men. He said, 14 minutes. Booker said, we have held longer. Cal said, yes, we have. He said, nobody opens any door. Nobody engages. We let them know we are here, and we are calm, and we are not moving, and we wait. Dick said, what if they cut the power? Cal said, then, we work in the dark. We know this building. The 14 minutes move the way time moves when the pressure is even and the outcome is uncertain, and everything around you has the particular clarity of a moment. You will remember exactly every detail in its place. The power went out at the 6-minute mark. Not all at once. The east side first, then the west side, then the emergency strip above the kitchen door, which was on a separate circuit in which Dix had rigged himself in 2019, came on with a low hum and held. In the back room, June heard it. Ren was asleep. The story about the owl had done its work. June sat in the dark with her hand on the cot and listened. She heard Cal's voice from the main room, low, steady, giving instructions she could not make out. She heard Booker respond. She heard the building. She had been listening to buildings all her life. The Route 11 diner had closed the apartment on Greenway when the neighbors went to sleep, the studio apartment, before that, with Ren in the crib 3 feet away. She had learned to read the sounds of spaces and know what they meant. This building meant holding. The radio came on a second time at the 4-minute mark. The voice said last chance. Cal said nothing. The radio clicked off. 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, she heard the cars. Not many. 4 or 5 moving without sirens, the particular engine signature of government vehicles doing their work without announcing it. She had grown up near a federal building, and she knew that sound without knowing she knew it. Then a knock on the front door. She heard the door open. She heard a voice she did not know, a woman's voice, professional, clear. Cal Decker, I am Special Agent Sarah Drummond. We have vehicles on all surrounding streets. The building is secure. June closed her eyes. She opened them. She got up and went to the door and unlocked it and walked into the main room. A woman stood in the doorway. Late 30s, dark suit, the particular posture of someone who had spent the last 3 years chasing one case across 3 counties and had just gotten the call that changed the shape of it entirely. She looked at Cal and then she looked at June. She said, June Calloway. June said yes. She said, I have been looking for a way to finish this for 3 years. She paused. I think you just gave it to me. She looked at the USB that Dix was already bringing up from the safe. She said, is that it? June said, that is it. Drummond looked at it for a long moment. She put on a glove from her pocket and took it carefully. She said, your mother was remarkable. June said, yes, she was. Drummond turned to go. June said, Drummond. She turned back. June said, Victor Slade. Drummond looked at her with an expression that was not surprise, but something that had been waiting to be confirmed. June said, he was the detective who took my report 6 years ago and buried it. He is in the video on that drive. He told Rankin my name. He told Rankin my mother's name. Drummond was quiet for a moment. She said, we have been looking at Slade for 18 months. She paused. What is on that drive is going to make it very simple. She looked at June directly. I want you to know that this is not a surprise to me, and that what happens next happens fast. June nodded. Drummond left. Through the window, June watched the lot fill with motion. Agents in jackets and agents in unmarked vehicles, and the particular organized efficiency of people who had been waiting a long time to move and were now moving. The black SUV from the East Block was surrounded within minutes. Cal came and stood next to her. She said, what happens now? He said, now we wait for Drummond to tell us what comes next. He paused. But the dangerous part is over. She said, are you sure? He said, not entirely. But Drummond is good at her job and she has what she needs. She looked at the lot. She said, my mother made a video and 6 pages of evidence and hid it all in the bottom of a bag. She did all of that in 3 weeks after she came here and you said no. She did it alone. He said nothing. She said she was not angry. She was just doing the next thing. She was doing the thing that would protect the people she loved even after the person she had trusted let her down. She just kept doing the next thing. He said yes. She said, I have been doing the next thing for 6 years. Single shifts and back office Kates and broken heaters and telling Wren about the owl on her backpack. Just the next thing. He said, you are your mother's daughter. She turned and looked at him. She said, thank you. For last night. For today. He said, it is not enough. He said it plainly without self-pity or performance. It is not enough for what I failed to do 6 years ago, but it is what I have. She said, it is what you have, and you gave it. That counts. He looked at the wall. The photograph of Iris Calloway looked back at him from its plain wooden frame. He said, I am going to fix that. She said, what do you mean? He said, I mean the wall. I mean what that wall is for. He paused. When this is finished, I am going to change something about what that wall means. She looked at the photograph. She thought about her mother. She thought about a woman who had spent the last weeks of her life sewing bravery into the lining of a bag, who had trusted a man who had failed her, who had believed in the right outcome past the point where most people would have stopped believing. She said she deserved better. He said, yes, she did. He said, so do you. In the back room, Wren woke up from her nap. She called for her mother. June went to her. She picked her up. She held her. And outside in the parking lot of the Iron Ridge Riders Clubhouse on the edge of Knoxville, Tennessee, federal agents were doing what they had waited 18 months to do, and the morning was moving towards something that had been a very long time coming. That evening, with Drummond's team still working through the perimeter in the lot, Nell made dinner. She made it the way she made most things without announcing herself, just doing the next necessary step. And what appeared on the long table was a real meal chicken and roasted potatoes and green beans and bread, the kind of meal that makes a room feel like it has a center and not just four walls. Ren sat at the table between June and Tuck. She had decided that Tuck was acceptable. She had made this decision on the basis of several criteria that she had not stated, but that June could read primarily that Tuck had found the correct size spoon for her cereal that morning without being asked and had given it to her without making it a thing. Ren said, "Are you learning to be an electrician?" Tuck, who had been told this by some unknown mechanism, looked up from his plate. He said, "Yeah, at night school." Ren said, "That is smart. Electricity is important." He said, "That is what I figured." She said, "What else do you do?" He said, "I fix motorcycles mostly." She said, "My mom's car has a heater that only works on one side." He said, "That is a blower motor. I can fix that." She nodded as if this confirmed a calculation she had been running. Booker was at the far end of the table, and he was telling Dick something about a motorcycle he had sold in 2003, which he appeared to have feelings about. Dix was eating and listening with the expression of a man who had heard this particular story before, but did not mind hearing it again. Cal sat at the head of the table and watched his people eat. June, across from him, watched him watch them. She said quietly, "You have been doing this a long time." He said 11 years as chapter president, longer before that in other capacities. She said, "It is a different kind of family." He said, "Yes." He paused. "The ones that last are always families. The ones that fall apart are the ones that forgot that." She said, "Did you ever have a family of the other kind? Wife, children?" He said, "I was married for 7 years. She was a good woman. We wanted different things by the end, and we were honest enough to say so." He looked at his coffee. "No children." He paused. "I have thought about that differently lately." She looked at him. He said, "That is not a statement in any direction." He said it plainly. "I'm just saying that things look different at 57 than they did at 40. She said, "I know what you mean." He said, "You have been doing this alone since Ren was born." She said her father was not a factor. She said it the way you say something that is true and closed, and you are not reopening it. He nodded. She said it has been hard in the practical sense. Not the way people sometimes think being a single mother is hard, which is that you are lonely, though sometimes it is that too. Mostly it is hard in the way that arithmetic is hard when you are tired. Every number has to come out right or something falls over. He said, "And you have been making it come out right." She said, "Mostly." He said, "You are 32 years old and you are raising a good child, and you have been carrying evidence for 6 years that is going to bring down a major federal case." He looked at her. "That is not mostly." She looked at the table. She said, "I did not know I was carrying the evidence." He said, "You carried it anyway." She said, "My mother put it there." He said, "Yes, but she chose the right person to put it with." That night after dinner, after Ren was asleep, Cal sat in the main room alone. He had sent his men to their various places. He sat with his black notebook and his coffee in the quiet of the building around him. He opened the notebook to the first page. Iris Calloway. 6 years of her name at the top of a list. 6 years of the particular weight of having made the wrong call and not being able to undo it. He turned to a blank page near the back. He wrote 2 names. He looked at them for a long time. He closed the notebook. The front door opened quietly. June came out in the flannel shirt she had found in the back room and her jeans and her bare feet on the clubhouse floor. She was quiet about it, careful not to wake anyone. She said, "I could not sleep." He said, "Sit down." She sat. He poured her a coffee that was old, but she did not seem to care. She put her hands around the cup. She said, "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Yes." She said, "What made you start the list? The notebook? The names? Why did you start keeping track of the people you did not help?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Because I needed to know." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "When I was younger, I thought not knowing was easier. If you did not keep track, the weight was general. Not specific. General weight is something you can carry a long time without naming it." He paused. "But at some point, the names started coming back to me anyway. In the middle of the night. In the silence after meetings." He looked at the notebook on the table. "I figured if they were going to come back anyway, I might as well know them right." She said, "Does it help?" He said, "It helps me remember that decisions have names on them, that every decision I make lands on a person." He paused. "It does not make it lighter. It makes it more honest." She looked at the notebook. She said, my mother's name is in there. He said, yes. She said, and now you have us here. Ren and me. He said, yes. She said, I want to ask you something and I want you to tell me the truth. He said, I will. She said, if Drummond had not called, if there was no federal case, if we had come in last night with nothing, just a woman and a kid in trouble that was ours alone, no evidence, no upside, nothing to offer except the need. She looked at him directly. Would you have helped us anyway? He held her gaze. He said, I would like to think so. I thought I was a man who made practical decisions. Then your mother stood in this room and asked for something real, and I made a practical decision, and she died for it. He paused. He said, I think the honest answer is that I do not know what I would have done if there was no case, no USB, no evidence. I hope I would have done what I should have done. I am not certain, and I am not going to pretend certainty I do not have. She nodded slowly. She said, that is a true answer. He said, I told you I would tell you the truth. She said, you did. She drank her coffee. She said, when this is over, I am going to have to figure out what comes next. The apartment, the diner. My whole life is in Knoxville, and a significant number of people in it have been quietly watching me for longer than I understood. He said, that will change when Rankin is arrested. She said, I know. But the knowing and the feeling are different things. He said, yes. She said, I am tired. She said it simply without complaint as a fact about the weather. 6 years of being tired is a different kind of tired than being tired for a week. It is in the bones. He said, I know that kind of tired. She said, do you? He said, I spent 6 years with a list of names I could not do anything about. That is its own kind of tired. She said, and now you are doing something. He said, yes. She looked at him. She said, it helps. I just want you to know that, whatever happens with the case, whatever Drummond does or does not do, what you did last night and today, it helps. He said nothing for a moment. He said, your mother believed I would get it right eventually. She said she was right. He said she was. They sat for a while in the quiet of the clubhouse, a woman of 32 and a man of 57, and the weight and the coffee and the November dark outside, and the particular quiet of people who had understood each other in the compressed time of shared difficulty and were now simply present together without needing anything more than that. Doyle Rankin was arrested at 6:47 in the morning on a Thursday, 2 days after Drummond took the USB. He was arrested at his home on the east side of the county. The arrest was made by 6 federal agents. He did not resist. He looked at the warrant, and he looked at the agents, and he looked at the early morning sky over the trees in his yard, and he said one sentence to the lead agent before they put him in the vehicle. He said, I should have looked harder at the bag. Victor Slade was arrested the same morning at his desk at the county police precinct by Drummond personally and 2 federal marshals. There were 14 officers in the building at the time. Not one of them intervened. Several of them, it would later come out, had been waiting for a long time. Slade said nothing. He put his hands on his desk when they came for him, and he looked at Drummond, and he looked at his own hands, and he went quietly. Drummond called Cal at 7:15. He took the call in the main room with June beside him. She said, it is done. Both in custody, no incidents. He said, Slade. She said, all of it. Rankin for the original murder, the conspiracy, the witness tampering, the others. Slade for complicity, obstruction across 6 years, and a number of related charges that I will explain in detail at a more appropriate hour. Cal said in June. She said June is a witness and a victim of related crimes, and she is going to need to sit with my office for several sessions, but there is no danger to her now. The network is cut. Rankin's operation does not move without Rankin, and the 3 men who visited the diner the other night are in separate custody since yesterday evening. He said she is safe. She said she is safe, he told June. June stood very still. She breathed. She looked at the photograph on the wall. She said, okay. She said it quietly and with the steadiness of someone who has been holding something at arm's length for a very long time and has just been told they can put it down. Not the collapse of someone who has been pretending. The deep exhale of someone who has been telling the truth all along and has finally been heard. She put her face in her hands. Not for long. She was not a woman who stayed in that place long. She had not allowed herself that for years. But she put her face in her hands for 30 seconds, and she breathed, and she let herself feel the full weight of what had just changed, which was everything, which was the last 6 years. When she looked up, Nell was standing in the kitchen doorway. Nell said, coffee is fresh. June said yes. She sat down at the long table. Wren came out of the back room 20 minutes later. She had her owl backpack on. She had her stuffed animals inside it. She had her shoes on the wrong feet, and she had not combed her hair, and she looked exactly like a 6-year-old who has slept well and is ready for the next thing. She said, "Is it over?" June said, "Yes, Bird." Wren said, "Are we going home?" June thought about the apartment on Greenway and the diner on Route 11, and the heater that worked on one side and the 4 years of late shifts and back office cots, and the math that never quite came out right, and the weight of 6 years of carrying something she did not know she was carrying. She said, "We are going to figure out what home looks like." "Okay, we are going to figure that out together." Wren considered this. She said, "Okay." She climbed up on a chair. She said, Tuck, can you fix the heater in the car today?" Tuck said after breakfast. She said, "Okay." The day came in around them, November light low and flat through the front windows and the smell of coffee and the particular sound of a room of people who have been through something difficult together and are now simply on the other side of it. The sessions with Drummond's office came next. 3 of them spread over 2 weeks in a conference room on the 4th floor of the Federal Building downtown. The building had the particular smell of all federal buildings, carpet cleaner and recycled air, and something underneath both of those that was the smell of a place where serious things were decided and then filed. June had not been in a federal building since the one time she had gone to get a passport for a trip she had eventually not taken. She answered every question she was asked. She described the alley off Market Street 6 years ago with the particular detail that only comes from seeing something you have replayed in your memory so many times that every stone in the wall has a location. She described the face of the man she had seen. She described going to Victor Slade and what he had said and how he had looked at her at the end, the expression she had not been able to read at the time and which she understood now. She described the men at the diner and the photograph of Wren and the drive to the clubhouse. She described her mother. She described the bag. Drummond listened to all of it without interrupting. She took notes in a small, neat hand. She asked clarifying questions at the end of each section, not to challenge what June had said, but to add precision to it, to pin it to specific times and specific locations, in specific words, the way you frame a picture, to make it stay. On the second session, Drummond showed her a photograph. It was a man she did not know. Not Rankin, not Slade. A man in his 40s with a forgettable face, the kind of face you looked at and immediately had difficulty holding in your memory. Drummond said, "Do you recognize this person?" June looked at it for a long time. She said, "I do not think so." Drummond said, "He is connected to 3 other witnesses in cases related to Rankin. 2 of those witnesses are dead. 1 has been missing for 4 years. June looked at the photograph. She said, "Is he going to be a problem?" Drummond said, "He is already in custody. He was arrested 2 days ago on a related charge." He paused. "I am telling you so you know. Not so you are afraid. So you know." June nodded. The third session was the last one. At the end of it, Drummond pushed a piece of paper across the table. She said, "This is the formal victim notification. It lists the charges, the defendants, the timeline of the case. You will get updates as the case proceeds." June picked it up. She looked at her mother's name listed as a victim in the original murder case, which had been reopened and which was now a count in the federal indictment. She looked at her own name listed as a material witness and a victim of related crimes. She put the paper down. She said, "My mother worked very hard to make sure this happened." Drummond said, "Yes, she did." June said she would be satisfied. Drummond said, "I think she would be more than satisfied." She looked at June. What she put together in those 3 weeks, the quality of it, the care of it, the way she thought through every possible failure point and prepared for it. He shook his head slightly. "I have been doing this for 14 years. What your mother did was not ordinary." June said she was not an ordinary person. Drummond said no, she was not. Each time she described the bag, she thought about what it meant that her mother had prepared it so carefully and hidden it so well, and trusted her daughter to carry it without knowing what she was carrying. She thought about the patience of that, the love of that, the specific kind of love that does not require witness, that works in private and asks nothing back, that prepares for futures it will not be there to see. Drummond told her on the third session that the sworn statement from the bag had been authenticated and entered into the federal record. The notary seal, a woman named Bertha Hill, who was retired and living in Nashville, had confirmed the document was hers. She remembered Iris Calloway. She remembered the afternoon she had come in with 6 handwritten pages and asked her to witness them and had not said what they were about. Drummond said your mother was precise. She did everything right. June said she usually did. In between the sessions, June stayed at Cal's clubhouse. Wren went back to school. Tuck fixed the heater in the car both sides and did not charge her anything. And when June tried to give him $20, he put his hands up and looked at the ceiling and walked away, which was the most she was going to get out of him on that subject. Nell drove Wren to school on the mornings June had sessions. She picked her up in the afternoons. Wren told Nell about her teacher, whose name was Mrs. Adler, and who was very strict about when you were allowed to sharpen your pencil. Nell listened to this with the seriousness it deserved. Booker made breakfast every morning without being asked the same breakfast eggs and toast and sausage, and the regularity of it was its own kind of steadiness. The same thing at the same time, something June had not had for a long time. She and Cal talked in the evenings after Wren was asleep. They talked at the long table over bad coffee, or sometimes good coffee, depending on who had gotten to the pot first. They talked about the diner. They talked about Gordon Bales and his Beagle photograph and his 2 years running mention of retirement. They talked about what a small business loan looked like and what the numbers would have to say to make sense, and what it would mean for the math that had been the background noise of her life if the diner was hers. He asked good questions. He listened to the answers. He did not tell her what to do. There was an evening in the first week of December when the topic shifted in the way topics shift, when two people have been talking about practical things for long enough that the practical things have been settled and what is left is something else. She had asked him about the chapter about what it had been like in the early years before he was president, and he had talked for a while about a man named Roy Decker. His father, who had started the Knoxville chapter in 1981 and had run it for 18 years before handing it to his road captain, and the road captain had run it for 7 years before Cal took over. He talked about what he had learned from Roy, which was mostly things about not speaking when you did not have something worth saying, and about the difference between a room that feared you and a room that trusted you, and about how you could build the first one fast and the second one took years, and the second one was the only one worth having. She said your father sounds like someone worth learning from. He said he was. He had his flaws. He was better at the chapter than he was at the family, which is a common thing with men who find their purpose in a room full of people they chose rather than people they were born to. He thought about it. He understood that about himself later. He tried to correct it, but some things you correct too late to fix the damage. You can only make sure you do not extend it. She said, do you think about that? About extending it? He said, every day. She said, what do you do about it? He said, I try to be the kind of person who shows up. He looked at his coffee. It sounds simple. It is not simple. Showing up means being present when it is inconvenient, when you are tired, when there is something easier to do. He paused. I was not always good at it. I am better now. She said, I believe you. He looked at her. She said, I believe you because of the notebook. She paused. A man who did not care about showing up would not carry a list of the people he failed to show up for. He would put it down. He would call it a practical decision and walk away. You did not. He said, I could not. She said, I know, that is the point. She had not had a person in her life who asked good questions and listened to the answers for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like. It felt like something opening slowly the way a door opens when the hinges have been stuck, and you push it gently and it takes longer than it should, and then it opens all the way, and the room it leads to is larger than you expected. The trial was set for March and lasted 4 weeks. June testified on the 3rd day. She wore a dark blouse and she had her hair down, which she almost never did, and she walked into the courtroom and she sat in the witness chair and she answered every question she was asked. She was calm. She had been waiting 6 years to say these things in a room where they mattered, in a room with a record and a judge and a jury and consequences, and she was not going to be anything other than exactly what she was, which was a woman who had seen something true and carried it and was now saying it out loud. The prosecuting attorney was a woman named Davies, 40, methodical, who built her cases the way Dix built engines, with patience and attention to the parts that were easy to overlook. She walked June through the night in the alley in the order it had happened. The early closing, the walk home, the shortcut, the brick wall in the dark, the 3 men, the face, She asked June to identify the man. June looked at Doyle Rankin at the defense table. She said, "That is the man I saw." She said it without hesitation and without drama, and with the particular steadiness of someone who has rehearsed a moment in their mind for 6 years and has arrived at it and found that it is exactly what they expected. Rankin did not look at her. Davies asked her about Victor Slade. She asked her about the visit to the police station and the room with no windows and the detective who had taken notes and never followed up. She asked her about her mother's death. She asked her to describe the bag and what was in it and how she had found it. June described all of it. She described the bag the way you describe something you have carried for 6 years, with the particular familiarity of an object that has been part of your daily weight and that you have never really looked at directly because it was always just there. She described finding the paper in the pocket and the drive to the clubhouse and the morning they had opened the lining and what had been inside. She was calm. She had been not crying for 6 years. She was not going to start now. The defense attorney asked her several questions designed to suggest that her memory was uncertain and that her testimony was motivated by things other than what she said they were motivated by. He asked whether she had been coached. He asked whether her relationship with the Iron Ridge Riders constituted a conflict of interest. He asked whether her understanding of the events had changed between when she first reported to the police and when she testified today. She answered each one in the same steady tone. She said her memory of the alley was not uncertain. She said no one had told her what to say. She said the Iron Ridge Riders had given her shelter and safety and nothing else, and that their doing so did not change what she had seen in an alley 6 years ago with her own eyes. She said her understanding of what had happened had not changed in 6 years. Only her ability to prove it had changed. The defense attorney sat down. Davies stood up for redirect and asked one question. She said, "June, in your own words, what is it that you saw in that alley on Market Street 6 years ago?" June looked at the jury. She said, "I saw Doyle Rankin give an order that resulted in a man's death. I saw his face clearly. I have not forgotten it for one day in 6 years." She looked at Davies. She said, "That is what I saw." After her testimony, she walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. Cal was there. He had been there every day of the trial in the back row in the street and clothes, unremarkable present. On the days he could not attend himself, one of his men was there instead. Booker on 2 days, Nell on 1. She had not asked them to do this. They had simply appeared, and she had understood what it meant. He said, "You did well." She said, "I just said what was true." He said, "That is doing well." They walked out of the courthouse together into the spring afternoon. Drummond was on the steps giving a statement to reporters. June did not stop. She had given her statement to the rooms that needed it. They walked to where Cal had parked and sat for a moment. She said, "My mother would have been glad to see today." He said, "Yes." She said, "I am glad to see today for her." He said, "I know." She said, "I want to ask you something." He said, "Yes." She said, "When this is done, officially when the verdict comes, I want to go back to the wall." He said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I want to see what you said you were going to change. You said when this was finished." She looked at him. "I want to be there for that." He said, "You will be." Doyle Rankin was convicted on all counts on a Thursday in May. The jury had deliberated for 11 hours. June sat in the gallery in the front row when they came back in. Wren was not there for the trial. She was at school where the ordinary and specific business of being 7 was happening. June was there alone, or as alone as you can be when you have people sitting behind you. The foreman read the verdict. Rankin sat in his chair and looked at the middle distance with the expression of a man who had long since made his peace with outcomes and was simply waiting for this one to finish. The judge thanked the jury. June sat in the gallery for a long moment after it was done. She sat and she let the silence of the room settle around her, and she thought about what it meant to reach the end of something that has been running for 6 years. Then she stood up and walked out. Victor Slade was sentenced to 22 years on 9 counts. He said nothing when the sentence was read. He was 60 years old. He looked at his hands. Rankin was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Drummond found June in the hallway afterward. She said, "It is done." She said it the way people say things that are very simple and very large at the same time. June said yes. Drummond said, "Your mother's statement is in the permanent record as Exhibit 41. Her name is there. It will stay there." June said, "Thank you." Drummond looked at her for a moment. She said, "What are you going to do now?" June said, "I have been thinking about that." She paused. "Gordon, the manager at the diner, has been talking about retiring for 2 years. He has not found anybody to buy the place." She paused. "I have been working there for 4 years. I know every table and every regular and every supplier. I know what is broken and what is not, and I know how to make the coffee the way Pete the cook likes it and how to make it the way the regulars like it, which are two completely different things." Drummond said, "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" June said, "A small business loan is different from nothing. It is still hard, but it is mine." Drummond smiled. It was the first time June had seen her smile, and it changed her face entirely into something warmer than anything her suit suggested. She said, "Call me if you need a reference." June said, "I will." That evening, the Iron Ridge Riders gathered at the clubhouse, not just the Knoxville chapter. Word had gone out through the network over the months of the trial quietly in the way these things travel between people who know each other and care about the same things, and by 6 o'clock there were 43 bikers in the lot, and the street in front of the building, and the alley behind it. They had come from 3 chapters and 4 counties without being asked, in the way that people show up for things that matter without needing an invitation. June arrived with Ren. They parked in the lot and got out, and June looked at the rows of motorcycles and the men and women standing among them, and she put her hand on Ren's shoulder. Ren looked at the motorcycles. She said, "There are a lot of them." June said, "There are." Ren said, "Are they all good people?" June looked at the lot, at the men in leather and the women in leather, and the ages of them, from Tuck at 20-something to an older man she did not know who was maybe 70 and had ridden from somewhere, who had gotten off his bike and was standing next to it with his helmet under his arm, looking at the clubhouse with an expression she recognized, the expression of someone who had come because it was the right thing to do and was not going to make a production of it. She said, "Yes," she said, "they are all good people." Ren said, "Okay." She took June's hand. Cal came through the crowd to meet them. He shook his head once when June looked at the crowd with the question in her eyes. He said, "I did not ask them to come." She said, "Then how?" He said, "They heard." He paused. "That is how it works. When something matters to one chapter, it travels to the others. Nobody calls a meeting about it. It just moves." He looked at the lot. "When Iris died 6 years ago, some of these people were there the week after. I did not know that until later. They came and sat in the lot, and they did not say anything, and then they left." He paused. "They were here before I understood why they were here." She said, "They knew before you did." He said, "Yes." He looked at her. "That is the part of this that I have been trying to understand for 6 years. The chapter knew something was wrong long before I was willing to name it, and they still followed my call. And I was wrong." She said, "They are still here." He said, "Yes." He said it the way you say something that means more than the 2 words. He walked her through the crowd, Ren beside her, and the men and women in leather who had come from 2 hours in every direction, made room, and some of them nodded and some of them said, "Ma'am," with a quietness that was not a formality, but something else, a recognition, a courtesy extended by people who understood what she had been through and wanted her to know they understood without making a thing of it. Inside the chapter was assembled at the long table Booker, Dix, Nell, Tuck. The table had been set with the good plates, the ones that came out for significant occasions, which meant this was a significant occasion. There was food, already the kind that had been prepared by multiple people without coordination, each one bringing the thing they made when the occasion called for something real. And against the far wall, Cal had done what he had said. The memorial wall was changed. Not removed, not replaced. The 7 photographs were still there. Iris Calloway's was among them, in the same plain wooden frame, third from the left, the face June had stood in front of on the first morning and recognized in her bones, but the wall had grown. To the right of the 7, in the same plain wooden frames, 2 more photographs. The first was a photograph of June taken outside the courthouse on the day she testified, just outside the doors, not posed a photograph Tuck had taken from 20 feet away with his phone and had printed at the drugstore without telling anyone. She was standing in the spring light in her dark blouse with her hair down, and she was looking at something off camera, and her expression was the expression of a woman who had just said every true thing she had been carrying for 6 years and who had not broken once while saying it. There was something in the set of her shoulders in the photograph that June did not recognize immediately as herself, and then did. It was the absence of bracing. She was not braced for anything. She was simply standing in the light. The second photograph was smaller. It had a different frame one Dix had made himself from a piece of walnut he had been keeping in the back room for a project he had not started yet. In it, Wren was laughing at something completely out of frame, her head thrown back, her owl backpack on her back, her feet lifting slightly off the ground the way they did when she laughed hard. Tuck had taken that one too at the diner one Saturday morning when June had brought Wren in, and Wren had run into Pete the cook coming out of the kitchen, and Pete had done something with a spatula that made her laugh so hard she nearly fell over. Below the two photographs on a small card that Cal had printed and pinned to the wall, it said, "The ones we kept." June stood in front of the wall. She stood in front of her mother's photograph and her own and her daughter's. She was very still. She thought about what it meant to be on a wall. She had spent her whole life being the person who made things happen for other people, who showed up and did the work and asked for nothing back, who had learned so early that needing something was a vulnerability and had built herself around the not needing. And here was a wall that said she mattered, not because of what she had done, not because of the case or the evidence or the 6 years, just because she had come to a door and knocked, and the people inside had decided she was worth keeping. She looked at the card. She said, "Cal." He said, "Yes." She said, "The wall was for the ones you lost." He said, "The wall was for the ones I owed something to." He paused. "Your mother belongs on it. She always did. And now so do you and Wren." He paused again, "But not for the same reason. Not because I failed you. Because you are the reason the wall means something different now." She looked at him. He said, "A wall that only holds the lost is a wall about failure. I have been looking at it for 11 years, and that is what it was." He looked at the photographs. "I want it to be a wall about what comes after, about the ones who made it, about the debt being paid forward." He was quiet for a moment. "I could not save your mother. I was able to be here for you, O." Maybe that is what she was hoping for when she wrote the name down. Not that I would fix what was already done, but that I would get it right the next time. She said my mother would like that. He said, "I think she would." She turned to look at the room, at Booker pouring things from the kitchen, at Dix adjusting his glasses and looking at Tuck with the exasperated affection of a man who has given up understanding youth but has not given up on it. At Nell, who had come to stand next to her without announcement, the way Nell did most things without announcing herself, just being where she needed to be. At Wren, who was looking up at her own photograph on the wall with an expression of complete uncertainty, as if she was not sure whether being on a wall was a good thing or a complicated thing, because Wren thought carefully about categories and did not like putting things in the wrong one. June crouched down next to her. She said, "What do you think, Bird?" Wren said, "I look weird in that picture." June said, "You look like yourself." Wren said, "Is that the same?" June said, "It is better." Wren looked at the photograph of Iris Calloway. She said, "Grandma is still on the wall." June said, "She will always be on the wall." Wren said, "I am glad they remembered her." June said, "Me too." She straightened up. She looked at Cal. She said, "After dinner, I want to talk to you about something." He said, "All right." She said, "The diner. My plans. I want to tell someone who is going to listen carefully and ask the right questions." She paused. "You seem like someone who asks the right questions." He said, "I do my best." She said, "Good. Then listen for a while." He said, "Always." They sat down to dinner. Outside, the 43 bikers had arranged themselves without anyone telling them how, some in the lot, some on the street, and the sound that came through the open front door was the particular sound of a large number of people who had come for a reason, being present for the reason, talking quietly among themselves, engine silent now, the evening settling around them. A few of them had brought food. A man June did not know came to the door at some point with a pot of something that smelled like chili and handed it to Booker and nodded at June before he went back outside. She nodded back. That was the whole exchange. That was enough. Wren ate her dinner with both elbows on the table. She listened to Booker finish his story about the motorcycle he had sold in 2003, and she said at the right moment, "Why did you sell it if you liked it so much?" Booker looked at her. He said, "That is the right question." He thought about it. He said, "I was young and I thought I could always get another one, and then it turns out you cannot always get another one." Wren nodded with the seriousness this deserved. She said, "That is like my stuffed elephant. It got dropped in a parking lot and I never found it again." Booker said, "Exactly like that." Tuck said, "I could build you another elephant." Wren said it would not be the same elephant. Tuck said no, but it could be a good elephant. Wren thought about this for a long time, long enough that Tuck had started eating again and had mostly forgotten about it. She said, okay. He looked up. She said, you can build me one, but make the ears floppy. The old one had floppy ears. He said, floppy ears. Done. She went back to her dinner. The evening continued. Nell told a story about a call she had taken in the ER in 2009 that had started badly and ended well, which was the best kind of story and the kind that required a certain amount of trust from the people telling it because the ending was not clear from the beginning. Dix added a detail he remembered from a similar call, which was different from Nell's call in almost every way, but shared something essential. And they argued about this pleasantly for a while. June sat next to Cal and did not say much. She did not need to say much. She listened and she ate, and she let the evening move around her at its own pace. She had spent 6 years at the center of a kind of urgent stillness, the stillness of a woman who was managing everything alone and could not afford to let anything slip. The stillness of someone who had learned to hold herself very still so that nothing around her would shift. This was different. This was the stillness of something that was not being held in place by effort. This was the stillness of a thing that had found its level. She did not have a name for it yet. She thought she might be learning one. There was an evening 3 weeks after the verdict when June was at the diner past closing, doing the books at the counter the way she did twice a week, and she found herself sitting for a long time with the pencil in her hand and the ledger open, but not looking at the ledger. She was looking at the photograph of her mother. She was thinking about something she had been thinking about in pieces for months, which was what it meant that her mother had made this plan. Not just the plan itself, the evidence and the bank and the address, but the thinking behind the plan, the way her mother had understood that some things could not be stopped directly, but could be survived and outlasted if you prepared carefully for the people you were leaving behind. She had not been trying to save herself. She had known she could not save herself. She had been trying to save June. June sat at the counter of her own diner with the ledger open in front of her, and she thought about what that cost. To know that you are not going to make it and to spend the time you have left, not on grief or on anger, but on making sure the people you love are going to be all right after you are gone. To think clearly about each step. To sew a pocket into a bag and write an address in your best handwriting and trust that the daughter who always called you stubborn, in the right ways, would find it at the right moment. That was love. That was a very specific and very demanding kind of love, the kind that does not ask anything back, the kind that works in private and does not require witness. June had been the recipient of that love for 6 years without knowing it. She put the pencil down. She looked at her mother's face in the frame behind the coffee maker. She said out loud to the empty diner, "I know, Mom." She said it the way you say things you have been meaning to say for a long time and have finally found the moment for. I know what you were doing. I know why you did it the way you did. I know it was not easy, and I know you were scared, and I know you were brave anyway. I know. The diner was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside on Route 11, a truck went by its headlights, sweeping briefly across the front windows. She picked up the pencil. She went back to the ledger. The numbers came out right. Later in the late winter, when the cold came back to Knoxville the way it always did, low and damp and settling, June drove to the clubhouse on a Sunday afternoon with Ren and a casserole dish that Nell had asked her to bring because Nell was hosting something she had called a Sunday without elaboration, and which turned out to be an afternoon of 7 people sitting around a table eating and talking about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of particular. Booker brought a pie he had made himself, which was better than anyone expected, and which he was clearly aware of based on the way he set it on the counter. Dix brought a 6-pack in a book he thought June should read, which she put in her bag and which she did eventually read. Tuck brought the elephant. He set it on the table in front of Wren without ceremony. It was gray canvas and it was stuffed firmly, and it had ears that were unmistakably floppy, stitched that way with care and some technical ingenuity. Wren picked it up. She looked at it. She squeezed one ear. She said, "It is good." Tuck said, "I know." She said, "The ears are right." He said, "I practiced." She said, "You practiced making elephant ears." He said, "I made 3 before I got the ears right." She looked at him. She said, "Thank you, Tuck." He said, "You are welcome, Wren." She put the elephant in her lap and did not put it down for the rest of the afternoon. Cal sat next to June at the table. They talked about the diner, and they talked about the chapter, and they talked about nothing in particular, and in the spaces between the talking, they were simply present, which was its own kind of conversation, the kind that does not need words, because the two people involved have said enough of the important ones already and can afford now to be quiet together. At some point in the late afternoon, Wren climbed into June's lap and fell asleep with the elephant against her chest. And June sat at the table with her daughter, asleep on her, and the table full of people who had become hers, in the afternoon light coming through the front windows, in the particular flat gold of a Tennessee winter afternoon. And she thought, this is what it feels like. Not safety exactly, not the absence of difficulty, not the end of the math that never quite came out right, or the end of the late nights, or the end of the particular loneliness of raising a child alone in a city that does not always see you clearly. But this, the weight of her daughter, the sound of people she trusted in the room around her, the photograph of her mother on a wall that had learned to hold something other than loss, the notebooks in men's pockets that were kept not as punishment, but as memory, as promise, as the particular kind of accounting that is done not to calculate profit but to measure what matters. Her mother had trusted the right people. She had made that call with incomplete information in the worst circumstances a person can face, with no guarantee that the trust would be honored. And she had been wrong once, which had cost her everything. And she had trusted again anyway, which had given her daughter what she needed when she needed it. That was the other thing about her mother. She had not stopped trusting because she had been failed once. She had just trusted more carefully the next time. June sat with her daughter asleep on her lap, and she thought, I am going to try to be like that. I am going to try to trust more carefully rather than trust less. I am going to try to be the person my mother thought I was when she put that address in the bag. She thought she could do that. She was already doing it. There was the Tuesday in February when a woman came into the diner at 11:45, right before close, and sat down at the far end of the counter. She was maybe 30, with a sleeping toddler against her shoulder, and the particular look of someone who has been moving for a long time and is very tired. She did not have a coat. She asked for coffee, and when June brought it, she wrapped both hands around the cup, the way June had once wrapped her hands around a cup in a building full of strangers who turned out to be the right people. June said, "Can I get you something to eat?" The woman said, "I only have $4. June said, "That is fine." She brought her eggs and toast. She brought the toddler a cup of apple juice with a lid. She sat down at the end of the counter and did not make it a thing. The woman ate. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Thank you." June said, "You are welcome." She said, "I mean, for not making me feel bad about it." June said, "Everyone needs somewhere to go sometimes." She said, "That sounds like something someone told you once." June looked at the photograph above the coffee maker. She said, "Yes, it does." The woman looked at the photograph. She said, "Is that your mother?" June said, "Yes." She said, "She looks kind." June said she was. She was very kind. She refilled the coffee without being asked. The diner was quiet and warm, and the overnight cook was coming in at midnight, and the last of the evening had the particular stillness of something that had come to a natural end and was ready to begin the next thing. Outside on Road 11, the highway kept on the way. Highways do, carrying people from one place to the next, without caring much about the particulars of why they were going, or what they were carrying, or what they would find when they got there. Some of them would find the right room. Some of them would knock on a door in the dark with nothing but a piece of paper in their hand and a child on their shoulder and something hidden in the lining of a bag they had been carrying without knowing it. And if the door opened and if the right person was on the other side, then what came next could be the thing that changed everything. That was what June Calloway knew. That was what her mother had known first. Outside, the winter continued. Inside the clubhouse on the edge of Knoxville, the wall held 9 photographs. Inside the diner on Route 11, the coffee was good. In a second bedroom of a small house on the west side of the city, a 7-year-old girl named Wren slept with a floppy-eared elephant and the particular piece of a child who has never gone to sleep uncertain of whether the morning will be all right. The morning was going to be all right. Iris Calloway had made sure of it. And June Calloway carried it forward. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. Outside, the winter continued. Inside, the winter continued also, but differently, the way things continue differently when you are not facing them alone, which was the only way that mattered. Pulling the light down early, turning the sky, the particular gray-blue, that means the temperature is going to drop another 10 degrees before morning. But inside the clubhouse on the edge of Knoxville, the lights were on, and the table was full, and the food was good, and Wren was asleep with her floppy-eared elephant, and the wall held 9 photographs. 7 for the lost, 2 for the kept, and there was room. On the wall of the Route 11 diner, behind the counter just above the coffee maker, a small framed photograph of a woman with dark hair and a serious mouth and sea-glass eyes that caught the light and held it looked out at the room. Not on a memorial wall, not in a frame that said loss. Just a photograph of a woman on the wall of her daughter's diner, where the people who sat at the counter every morning could see her, and where she could see them back, and where the coffee was good and the light came through the windows in the morning in a way that made the whole room seem like it had been expecting you, which was the right place, which was exactly the right place for it. And the diner opened every morning at 7, and the regulars came in. And June Calloway was behind the counter, sea-glass eyes and ponytail, and the particular steadiness of a woman who had carried something for 6 years without knowing it, and had set it down in the right place, and was now in the ordinary and important way of living. Just living. Just that. Which was everything her mother had worked to give her. Which was enough. Which was in the final accounting more than enough. It was the whole thing. Later, when the dinner was done and the plates had been cleared, and the 43 bikers in the lot had begun to start their engines one by one, the low rumble of departures that went on for 20 minutes. The sound of people heading back to their own chapters and their own counties and their own reasons for having come. June stood in the doorway and watched. Wren was at her side, leaning against her, almost asleep on her feet. June picked her up. Wren put her head on June's shoulder. She said, "Are we going home now?" June looked at the lot, at the last few bikes pulling out at the building behind her, with its long table and its memorial wall and its plain wooden frames. She said, "Soon, Bird." She said, "We are almost home." Inside, Cal was standing in front of the wall. He stood in front of his mother's photograph and his chapter's history and the 2 new frames that had changed what the wall was for. He stood with the notebook in his hands, the small black notebook, with no writing on the cover, the one he had carried for 15 years. He opened it. He looked at the first page. Iris Calloway. He turned to the page near the back where he had written 2 new names. He looked at them. Then he did something he had not done before with anything in the notebook. He drew a single line under the 2 new names. Below the line he wrote, "Debt paid forward." He closed the notebook. He put it in his pocket. He walked to the back of the room and got his coffee and came to the doorway where June was standing with Wren asleep on her shoulder. He stood next to her. Outside, the last motorcycle turned out of the lot and onto the road, and the sound of it faded into the spring night, and then it was quiet. June said, "I have been carrying things alone for a long time." He said, "I know." She said, "I am not sure how to stop." He said, "You do not stop." He thought about it. "You just start having help carrying them." She looked at him. He said, "That is all it is. You do not hand it over. You do not put it down. You just stop being the only one." She was quiet. She said, "My mother thought that was possible." He said she was right. She said she usually was. The spring air coming through the open door was warm for the first time in months, the kind of warmth that arrives in Tennessee in May, like a promise being kept slow and full, and carrying the smell of the hills and the river, and everything that had been waiting through the long winter to come back. June Calloway stood in the doorway of the Iron Ridge Riders Clubhouse with her daughter asleep on her shoulder, and the night around her full of something she was going to have to find a new word for something that was not exactly peace, because peace implied the absence of difficulty, and difficulty was not going away, but something that was related to peace, the way a working fire is related to warmth. She thought about her mother. She thought about Iris Calloway, who had taken a practical approach to the worst circumstances a person can face, who had sewn hope into the lining of a bag and given it to her daughter, and trusted that the daughter would carry it until the right moment came. She had carried it 6 years. She had not known she was carrying it. She had carried it anyway. That was the thing, she thought. That was the whole thing. You carry what you are given. You do not always know what it is. You carry it because it was given to you by someone who loved you and trusted you with it, and you keep carrying it past the point where most people would put it down. And then one night you pull over on a dark road and you find the thing you did not know you were carrying, and you walk it to the door of the right room. That was the whole thing. She held her daughter. She looked at the wall through the door behind her, her mother's face in its plain wooden frame, looking out the way people look in old photographs, steady and still and present. She said very quietly, just to herself, and maybe to the room, and maybe to the spring night, and maybe to something larger than all of it, I carried it, Mom, the way you asked me to. And somewhere, maybe in the space between the saying and the silence that followed, something that had been waiting for 6 years and 3 weeks and 14 days, and one terrible night on a street corner in Knoxville, finally quietly came to rest. The wall in the clubhouse held 9 photographs now, 7 for the ones who had been lost, 2 for the ones who had been kept, and there was room for more. There is always room for more. The Route 11 diner changed hands on the 1st of August. Gordon Bales had accepted June's offer with less ceremony than she had expected, which was to say he had called her on a Tuesday morning, told her the number, and when she said yes, he had said good, and that was most of it. They had signed the papers on a Wednesday in a lawyer's office downtown, and Gordon had shaken her hand and given her the keys, and said Pete already knows he is staying, and June had said, I know, I already talked to Pete. Gordon had laughed. He had looked at her for a moment the way people look at someone when they are revising their understanding of who that person is, finding them larger than the category they had put them in. He had said, you are going to be fine, June. She had said, I know. She had not said, I know, to be confident. She had said it because she had done the math so many times over the weeks of negotiating the loan and talking to the bank and sitting at Cal's table going over the numbers with the same attention she had brought to every problem she had not been able to afford to get wrong, and the math kept coming out right, not easily right, not without effort, but right in the way that things are right when you have accounted for everything honestly and not borrowed against a future you could not guarantee. The loan had gone through on the 17th of July. She had sat in the parking lot of the bank and called Nell. Nell had said good. She had said it the way she said most things, plainly and without unnecessary decoration. Then she had said, do you want to get lunch? June had said yes. They had gone to a diner on the other side of town, not the Route 11, a diner neither of them had any connection to, and they had eaten sandwiches, and Nell had asked her what she was most afraid of, and June had told her specifically and honestly the 4 things she was most afraid of about owning the diner, and Nell had listened to all 4 and had then told her specifically and honestly what she thought about each one. 2 of the fears were valid and required planning. 2 were not the things she was really afraid of, but were standing in for it. The real thing she was really afraid of, Nell said, was that she would succeed and it would still not feel like enough. June had looked at her. Nell had said it is a common thing. You have been surviving for so long that thriving feels like a category error. June had thought about that for a long time. She thought about it while she was doing the changes she made to the diner. They were not large. She fixed the light above the 3rd booth from the end, which had been flickering since 2022, and which she had been meaning to mention to Gordon for a year and a half. She had Tuck look at the kitchen ventilation, which he fixed in 2 hours on a Saturday morning, and which made a noticeable difference immediately. She bought a new coffee maker, a good one, not an expensive one, a reliable one, and the regulars noticed within a week. Old Harold, who sat at the 2nd stool from the left every morning and ordered black coffee and whole wheat toast, and had done so for 11 years, told her the first Thursday after the new machine went in that the coffee was better. She said, thank you, Harold. He said, Gordon never fixed the coffee. She said, I know. He said, it is a good change. She said, I hope so. He went back to his toast. That was the whole conversation, and it was enough. The cot in the back office stayed. She did not put Ren on it anymore. Ren had a proper after-school arrangement now. 3 days at the neighbors, 2 days with Nell, who had turned out to be the kind of woman who picked up children from school and did homework at kitchen tables without it needing to be made into anything larger than what it was. But the cot stayed because she thought someday someone might need it the way she had once needed it, and she wanted it to be there. She bought a small wooden frame and put a photograph in it. She hung it behind the counter just above the coffee maker in the spot where Gordon had kept a list of soup specials. The photograph was of her mother. The regulars noticed it. A few of them asked. She told them. She told it plainly and without performance. And the people who asked listened the way people listen when they understand they are being trusted with something that matters. Several of them did not say anything at all, just nodded and looked at the photograph and went back to their coffee, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. The older ones especially. The ones who had lived long enough to know that some photographs behind counters were simple decoration and some were something else. Harold looked at it on the fourth day. He said, "Is that your mother?" She said, "Yes." He said, "She looks like you." June said, "She looks like herself. I look like her." He thought about that. He said, "Yes." He said, "I suppose that is the right order." He went back to his toast. She smiled at the counter and did not say anything else. That was how it went. The evenings at the clubhouse continued. Not every evening, not in any formal arrangement, but often enough that it became a thing with shape and weight, the kind of thing that does not need to be named to be real. Wren and her floppy-eared stuffed elephant, which Tuck had made out of gray canvas and stuffed with something from the back of the shop, and sewn closed with the particular careful stitch of a man who had spent 20 years making motorcycles reliable, which turned out to translate directly to stuffed elephants. Booker and his story about the motorcycle he had sold in 2003, which had acquired new details at each telling and which Wren now asked for by name. Nell at the table with coffee and the quality of her attention, which June had come to understand, was the most useful thing Nell gave to any room she was in. Cal and June at the end of the table, the conversations. She had not had a person in her life who asked good questions and listened to the answers for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like. It felt like something opening slowly the way a door opens when the hinges have been stuck, and you push it gently and it takes longer than it should, and then it opens all the way. She was not in a hurry about it. She had been in a hurry about everything for 6 years. She was not in a hurry about this. One evening in late September, after Wren had gone to sleep in the back room and the others had drifted to their own places, June sat at the long table and told Cal the things she had not told anyone. She said, "I have not been afraid since they arrested Rankin." He said, "That is a good thing." She said, "It is, but it is also strange. I have been afraid for so long that not being afraid feels like something is missing. Like I reach for it and it is not there, and I have to remind myself that is the good outcome." He said, "I know that feeling." She said, "Do you?" He said, "After my wife left, I spent 2 years being braced for the next thing to go wrong. And then things stopped going wrong, or they went wrong in the ordinary, small ways that things go wrong, and I kept being braced for it." He looked at his hands. It takes time to learn that the emergency is over. The body does not always get the message when the mind does. She said, "How do you help it?" He said, "You just keep going. You keep doing the ordinary things. Eventually, the ordinary things start to feel ordinary again, instead of like something you are doing between catastrophes." She said, "That is not a very exciting answer." He said, "No, but it is the right one." She looked at him. She said, "I think I like you, Cal Decker." He looked at her. He said, "I think I like you too, June Calloway." He said it simply and without elaboration, and that was the right amount, she thought. That was exactly the right amount. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the wall. All 9 photographs. 7 for the waist. 2 for the kept. She thought about her mother. She thought about the particular kind of intelligence it took to prepare for something terrible while it was happening to you, to think clearly about the people you loved and what they would need and how to give it to them across the distance of years you would not be there for. She thought about the bag and the hidden pocket and the careful stitching and the address written in the hand that had written her name on school permission slips and birthday cards and grocery lists and everything else that made up the texture of being loved by that specific person. She thought about what it meant to be trusted. She had been trusted with something she did not know she was carrying. She had carried it. She had walked it to the right door. The right door had been the right door. Her mother had been right. She looked at the photograph of Iris Calloway in its plain wooden frame on the wall that had changed from a wall about failure into a wall about what comes after failure, which was the more important thing. The thing that mattered when the dust settled and the people who were still standing looked at each other and figured out what the next step was. She said, "Good night, Mom." She said it quietly, just to herself in the room in the photograph. Then she picked up her coffee and turned back to the table, and the man sitting at it in the evening that was still going on, which was the ordinary and important business of living, which was the thing her mother had worked so hard to give her, and which she was not going to waste. Outside the window, the September night was warm and full of cricket sound and the distant low note of the highway. Inside the clubhouse on the edge of Knoxville, the wall held 9 photographs. And on a shelf behind the long table in a spot that Dix had cleared without being asked, sat a small framed photograph of a woman with dark hair and a serious mouth and sea glass eyes that caught the light and held it. Not on the wall, on the shelf, where you could see it when you sat down, where it could see you back. And that was the right place for it. And the night continued, and the next day came. And the diner on Route 11 opened at 7 in the morning the way it had opened every day for 22 years. And the regulars came in and sat at their usual stools and ordered what they usually ordered. And the coffee was good, and the light through the windows was the early light of a working city beginning its day. And June Calloway was behind the counter, with her hair in a ponytail, and her sea-glass eyes, and the particular steadiness of a woman who had carried something for 6 years without knowing it, and had set it down in the right place, and was now, for the first time in a very long time, just living. Just living. Which turned out to be more than enough, which turned out to be everything.